You just finished a long day. You're tired, and all you want is a hot shower. But what if that wasn't an option? What if staying clean involved practices that would make your stomach churn today? Join us as we uncover the astonishing and often shocking ways medieval people tackled their personal hygiene. It's not what you think. For centuries, we've believed that the Middle Ages were a time of unwashed bodies, rotting teeth, and unbearable smells. The phrase medieval hygiene still conjures up images of lice-infested hair, chamber pots emptied into the street, and peasants too ignorant or devout to bathe. But what if this popular narrative is more myth than reality? What if the story of medieval cleanliness, or the lack thereof, has been heavily distorted by time, propaganda, and a modern sense of superiority? Step into a world where soap was made with ashes and animal fat, where public bathhouses flickered with candlelight and whispered with scandal, and where herbal satchels were worn like armor against both disease and demons. Hygiene in the Middle Ages was not defined by sparkling tiles and mint-scented foam. It was something far more raw, improvisational, and deeply tied to belief. Let's begin not with dirt, but with necessity. In a world without antibiotics, refrigeration, or sewage systems, cleanliness wasn't a luxury, it was survival. A single infected wound could mean death. The stench of decay wasn't merely unpleasant. It was thought to attract evil spirits, or even cause illness itself, a belief known as miasma theory. From this fear grew a surprising ingenuity. Medieval people cleaned themselves not despite their era, but because of it. Consider the bathhouse, a place we've come to associate with either Roman decadence or Victorian revival. But between those ages, throughout medieval Europe, bathhouses thrived. In cities like Paris, London, and Cologne, they were common fixtures, modest wooden structures or stone chambers where people of all classes would go not only to bathe but to socialize, conduct business, or even arrange clandestine meetings. In 14th century Prague, there were more than 30 public bathhouses. Not bad for a time we assume knew nothing of sanitation. But the baths weren't just for cleaning the body, they were spiritual. Monks, before copying sacred texts, often cleansed themselves in ritual washings. Pilgrims would purify themselves before visiting holy sites. Water, seen as a gift from God, was central to physical and moral purification. Even penance, the act of spiritual cleansing, was often symbolically linked to water. And while hot water was a luxury, it was not unheard of. Wealthier households could afford heated baths. For the poor, streams, barrels, or even communal cauldrons served as makeshift spas. They would boil herbs like rosemary, lavender, or thyme, not just for fragrance, but because these were believed to ward off infection and evil spirits. Soap was another surprise. Not only did it exist, it came in a surprising variety. Made from rendered animal fats mixed with wood, ash, or lye, early soaps were often coarse and alkaline, but in Islamic Spain and parts of the Byzantine Empire, the knowledge of fine soap-making thrived, producing softer, scented bars with olive oil, laurel, or spices. These recipes would slowly find their way into Western Europe, pass through trade routes and translations of forgotten manuscripts. Hair care, too, was anything but neglected. Comb remains from archaeological digs show fine teeth for removing lice, and recipes survive that detail: rinses made from nettles, vinegar, or even crushed rose petals. Shaving, plucking, or oiling the beard wasn't uncommon. And in courtly culture, perfume was as much a part of etiquette as table manners. Of course, not everyone bathed regularly. In times of plague, water was feared as a carrier of disease. Ironically, when cleanliness was most needed, it became taboo. Physicians warned that hot water opened the pores and let in the poisonous air, a tragic misunderstanding that halted centuries of progress. Yet even then, people found ways to stay clean. Dry baths, rubbing the body with linen cloths, scented powders, or herbs became widespread. But what of the poor? What did the average peasant know of hygiene? More than we think. In many villages, communal washing days were part of life. Streams and wells were precious, often protected by custom or even sacred law. Women washed clothes using wood ash to create an alkaline solution, a rudimentary but effective form of detergent. Infants were rubbed with salt or herbal oils to protect their skin. Some medieval midwives used rosewater or vinegar for postpartum, cleansing both for mother and child. And then there's the matter of smell. While deodorants as we know them didn't exist, the desire to smell pleasant was very real. Pomanders, small metal spheres filled with aromatic herbs, were worn around the neck or carried in hand. Popular blends included cloves, cinnamon, and dried orange peel. Wealthier individuals might dab rose oil or lavender on their clothing. Even the church took scent seriously. Incense not only pleased God, it was believed to purify the air. Toothbrushes, not quite, but chew sticks, twigs from aromatic trees like neem or licorice, were used to clean teeth and freshen breath. Charcoal, ground oyster shell, and salt served as primitive tooth powders. Manuscripts describe concoctions to whiten the teeth and sweeten the breath, often made with sage, mint, or vinegar. But perhaps the most surprising discovery is this: much of what we know about medieval hygiene comes from those who sought to slander it. Protestant reformers described Catholic bathhouses as dens of sin. Victorian moralists painted the past as ignorant and dirty to emphasize their own progress. The Renaissance, in glorifying antiquity, often mocked the darkness of the Middle Ages, but behind the ridicule lies a more complex truth, one of adaptation, not abandonment, for in an age of wood fires, no plumbing, and disease without cure, the medieval world did not turn its back on cleanliness. It invented its own methods. Crude, yes, sometimes disturbing, but often surprisingly effective. What seems repulsive to us today was, for them, a strategy of survival. If we were to peel back the cobbled streets of a medieval town, lift the stones and trace the channels, we'd find an infrastructure hidden in plain sight. Waste management in the Middle Ages was not an absence of system, but rather a secret system of necessity and improvisation. To survive in a world without sanitation laws, the people of the medieval world had to invent invisible rhythms for managing the most dangerous material of all, human waste. At first glance, medieval cities appear like breeding grounds for filth, narrow alleys, open gutters, dung-strewn markets, and in some places, that was true. But this was not always a symptom of ignorance. It was often the result of population pressure, war, famine, or abandonment of older systems. In earlier centuries, especially under Roman influence, cities in Europe had enjoyed far more advanced urban planning. As Rome fell and its aqueducts crumbled, many of its water systems were lost, but not entirely forgotten. In London, by the 12th century, there were coordinated efforts to build public latrines over the Thames or its tributaries. Some of these were elaborate structures, rows of privies with flowing water beneath, flushed by the tides. In monasteries, particularly in England and France, cloaca large drains channeled waste away from dormitories or infirmaries. These were feats of engineering, constructed with stone vaulting, angled slopes, and gravity-fed systems. The Cistercian monks, known for their asceticism, were also brilliant hydraulic engineers. In places like Fountains Abbey and they diverted streams not just for mills but for sanitation, creating fresh water supplies and complex latrine systems. One surviving manuscript even describes the importance of keeping the waste moving, lest the devil take root in stagnant filth. Cleanliness here was both physical and spiritual. In domestic life, chamber pots were commonplace, but so too were cesspits, deep stone-lined holes into which waste was dumped and periodically emptied. Some were connected to rudimentary sewers or channels that led outside city walls. The profession of gong farmer, those who cleaned cesspits, was one of the most dangerous jobs of the era. Exposure to methane, disease, and the sheer weight of labor made it both essential and nearly untouchable in society. Yet without them, cities would collapse under their own waste. In places like Lübeck or Ghent, fines were issued for dumping refuse improperly. Guilds regulated cleanliness within workshops. Marketplaces had designated waste zones, and in times of plague, entire teams were employed to scrub streets, whitewash walls, and burn aromatic plants to ward off bad air. Clothing, too, played its role in the battle against dirt and decay. In a world of wool, linen, and leather, textiles were both armor and burden. The outer garments, cloaks, surcoats, tunics, absorbed dust, sweat, and smoke. But beneath them, linen undergarments served a subtle purpose. They were the layer closest to the skin, easier to wash and often changed more regularly. Next to skin hygiene, it turns out, was an intuitive principle. Washing clothes was done near streams or communal washhouses. Women pounded fabric with wooden paddles, used ashes or fermented urine to lift stains, and dried garments in the sun not merely to bleach them, but to purify them through heat and light. The smell of ammonia might offend our senses today, but to them it signaled cleanliness achieved through chemical reaction. Then came the invisible threats: fleas, lice, and mites. Bedbugs nested in straw mattresses. Parasites thrived in damp cloth. To combat them, people turned to herbs, penarial, wormwood, and rue, which they believed repelled vermin and evil alike. Tucking these into beds, clothing, or even braids wasn't superstition alone. Some of these herbs are now known to contain mild insecticidal compounds. In this sense, what we call folk medicine might better be termed pre-modern science, trial and error filtered through survival. And still, hygiene remained deeply bound to belief. Dirt was not only a sign of poverty but of sin. The plague, in particular, reframed cleanliness as moral virtue. Flagellants beat themselves in the streets, hoping to purify their souls. Others, believing the world to be under divine judgment, obsessed over invisible corruptions of the flesh. Bathhouses were shuttered, not due to ignorance, but out of fear that water once seen as healing had become dangerous. Even the church took a contradictory stance. While early Christian saints were praised for rejecting bodily pleasures, including bathing, later monastic orders emphasized regular washings, cleanliness of habit, and orderly environments. In some abbeys there were scheduled bath days, even warm towels heated over coals. The divine, it seemed, could dwell in a clean and ordered body just as icily as in a mortified one. The paradoxes are everywhere. A knight might go months without a full bath, yet carry rose-scented oil to anoint his hands before a feast. A peasant might live in a smoky, lice-ridden hut, yet scrub her linens weekly with river sand and prayer. And in cities, the stink of tanneries and butcher shops was tolerated not out of laziness, but because the economy and survival depended on them. There are records of medieval physicians advocating foot washing with vinegar to prevent fever, or washing the eyes with rose water to cure melancholy. Perfumed gloves, scented wax seals, and herb-filled shoes were all part of a sensory world built not for comfort, but for protection. It was not about smelling pleasant, it was about keeping rot, sickness, and evil at bay. That's so how did we lose this nuanced understanding? Partly it was erased by progress itself. As modern plumbing emerged, older methods seemed barbaric by comparison. As Enlightenment thinkers romanticized classical antiquity, the intervening centuries were painted as dark and dirty. But mostly, it was a matter of forgetting how intelligent desperation can be. Today, we flush, we scrub, we sanitize with chemicals whose names we can't pronounce. But if the power went out, if the pipes froze, or if the comforts of modernity vanished, we would find ourselves rediscovering the same medieval logic. We'd burn herbs to mask the air. We'd dig pits and carry buckets. We'd wash with vinegar, boil water with ash, and listen to old wives' tales, not as superstition, but as hope. Because at the heart of medieval hygiene was not ignorance, but intimacy, with nature, with the body, with death. If we sift through the dust of history and strain to hear what remains beneath the noise, the sermons, the prescriptions, the ridicule, we find something unexpected. The hygiene of the Middle Ages was not merely survival, it was a kind of philosophy, a worldview, a testament to the human will to remain clean not only in body, but in soul, even when the world itself seemed to rot. The Middle Ages inherited their knowledge from many sources: Roman engineering, Greek medicine, Arabic science, Christian theology, and ancient pagan customs. Yet, what they created with that inheritance was uniquely their own, a patchwork of practices shaped by faith, fear, necessity, and intuition. Even their most bizarre rituals had meaning. To scatter rue on a windowsill, to wash the hands after each act of labor, to perfume the hair with rosemary oil before a feast. These were not quirks, these were statements of dignity in a brutal world. And not all was forgotten. Some medieval hygiene practices laid the groundwork for habits we now consider modern. The concept of the clean body before prayer. It lives on in the Islamic practice of wudu, the Jewish netalet, yadim, and the Christian blessing with holy water. The structured monastic emphasis on bathing, order, and grooming. It eventually informed hospital hygiene, the practice of airing out clothing in sunlight. It's still one of the simplest and most effective antimicrobial treatments we know, and we barely think about it. Consider the rediscovery of fermented cleansers and ash-based soaps. In recent years, science has validated what medieval herbalists already understood, that many of their mixtures had antibacterial properties. Wine and vinegar, once smeared on wounds or used for washing, are now recognized for their acidic cleansing power. Even the use of copper vessels, long believed to purify water, has found new validation in microbial studies. Yet beyond the tools and recipes lies something deeper. The medieval belief that cleanliness was a form of virtue. Today, we separate the physical from the spiritual, the visible from the internal. But in the medieval mind, to be dirty was not just to risk infection, it was to risk judgment. To care for the body was to honor the Creator. Dirt was not just filth, it was disorder, and order was divine. This is why the peasant mother scrubbed her infant's skin with herbs, why monks shaved their heads with care, why city officials tried, however imperfectly, to separate waste from water. They were not building a sewer system, they were restoring cosmic balance. Even filth had its rituals. The collection of waste was seasonal, the laundering of clothes, communal, the fumigation of homes with burning herbs a kind of ceremony. There was, in their chaos, a strange choreography. Of course, it was far from perfect. Disease ravaged entire cities, plague carts overflowed, wells were poisoned either through ignorance or desperation. But even in the horror, we see not passivity but effort. Medieval societies didn't collapse because they were dirty. They struggled to remain clean in a world that was constantly decaying. And perhaps that's the most astonishing truth of all, that in a time before antibiotics, before sterile gloves or filtered water, people still tried. They scraped soap from tallow, they boiled moss to pack wounds, they combed lice from each other's hair, not with disgust, but with a kind of familial tenderness. Hygiene was not convenience, it was kinship, survival, sacred ritual. And today, as we return to herbal remedies, sustainable practices, and ancient bathing rituals in spas that charge a fortune for the experience, are we not circling back to the same truths they knew? To cleanse is to restore balance, to wash is to remember mortality, to scent the body is to speak without words, and to care for one's cleanliness is to say, I am alive, I am part of something, I will not vanish into the dirt without resistance. What was once mocked chamber pots, vinegar rinses, ash soaps, pomanders is being re-evaluated not just by historians, but by scientists, designers, and medical scholars. In their bones and ruins, we find not a world of filth but a code of resilience. So the next time you step into a steaming shower, light a candle scented with rosemary, or sip a herbal tea for digestion, pause, because in some hidden way, are echoing the gestures of a world long buried, world that fought for purity with herbs, prayer, and heat, and which, despite its hardships, never stopped trying to stay clean. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the forgotten practices of medieval hygiene. If this exploration sparked your curiosity or reshaped the way you see the past, we invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to support more investigations into the forgotten, the forbidden, and the astonishing truths buried beneath official history. Your engagement helps keep these hidden stories alive. Until next time.